In 1938, Orson Welles produced the famous radio broadcast War of the Worlds that had thousands of Americans cowering in their basement, convinced that extraterrestrial invaders were about to kill us all. In 2002, a similar number of ringing phones went unanswered across America as the Ring had just come out, caller ID wasn't really a thing yet, and everyone was halfway convinced that answering a call that was probably just your grandma or Jake from State Farm would lead to certain death within a week. Yesterday, CNN polls gave Donald Trump a 5-point lead ahead of all other Republican presidential candidates. What do all three of these scenarios have in common? They're freaking terrifying. Which is relevant because, unless you've been stuck on Mars growing poop potatoes completely out of touch with everything happening on Earth, you know that right now, it's the time for us to fear demons, ghosts, and zombie deer, for Halloween is drawing near. You can tell by all the pumpkin beer and big fake spiders that reappear year after year after year. Ya hear? Well, I could flip through this rhyming dictionary and continue to make up terrible poetry, and maybe even some awesome dance moves to go with it. I think my boy Drake's already got that covered right now. So instead, I'm gonna crack open one of these pumpkin beers, totally writing this off on my taxes, and talk to y'all about something I love only slightly more than bad jokes and slightly less than dramatic costume changes. Science.
Stroke of Brinius.
Welcome to the very first episode of Stroke of Brinius, quite possibly the only web series fueled largely by pasta carbonara, where I, Brie, get to use the awesome and powerful tool of science to explore the world around us. Today, since it is mid-October, we'll be starting with the Halloween-themed science of fear. Expressions of fear, as with other intense emotions, are consistent across cultures as well as throughout human history. While underlying causes for any emotion are difficult to pinpoint, fear has been studied more than a lot of other emotions because the physical responses are easier to measure. Probably also because it's really fun to scare people and say it's for science. Which could be why I no longer have any roommates. That and the fact that in any fridge I have access to, no cheese is safe. Fear is the result of a stressful stimulus, be it real,
I'm out of sriracha,
or imaginary. Black stormtroopers! Seriously, why are people so concerned about that? Creating an entirely unconscious chain reaction in the brain that culminates in the fight or flight response. Elevated heart rate, involuntary tensing of muscles, shortness of breath, increased perspiration, and even in extreme circumstances, the pooping of the pants. There are 5 main parts of the brain involved in this chain reaction. The first is the thalamus, which is like your sensory post office, taking in large loads of stimuli and sending them off on their well-sorted paths to the correct other parts of your brain. The second is the sensory cortex, which is essentially Google Translate for your nervous system. Then there's the hippocampus, your brain's librarian. Mine is a lovely set of perpetually 65-year-old twins named Edith and Mildred, who look up the context of stimuli and store conscious memories. Finally, there's the hypothalamus, which activates your fight or flight response. And the amygdala, the most important part in the fear process, which scopes the threat, decodes emotions, and in doing so, stores emotional memories for later retrieval. Fear simultaneously travels from the thalamus to the amygdala to the hypothalamus for immediate freakouts, and from the thalamus through the sensory cortex and hippocampus before reaching the amygdala for the full scope of the situation. The amygdala is the final step in the fear process. Without it, fear isn't really much of an issue. When lab rats with damaged amygdalas have been exposed to the great and powerful terror kittens, they pretty much just see this.
Meow.
And are like, hey cat, what's up, fur bra? Because while they still exhibit immediate fear when bitten by the cat because of the first neurological pathway, They don't associate seeing the cat again with the bite because the second pathway cannot be completed. Also, it's the amygdala that retrieves emotional memories stored in your subconscious, like when you're dreaming. So without one, nightmares following a scary or otherwise traumatic experience, like the time I had a dream that every single time I flushed the toilet, one of the evil characters from Game of Thrones would pop out and try and kill me, wouldn't really be an issue. This double pathway is also why we sometimes like to be scared. When a noise in a haunted house or scary movie makes you jump, your hypothalamus immediately freaks out and releases a whole bunch of chemicals to trigger the fight or flight response. But then your amygdala is like, nah bro, you're good. So we're left with all this extra dopamine, adrenaline, oxytocin, which are then associated with a feeling of well-being, which makes us feel great after the initial shock. Due to this, as well as to the amygdala's storage of emotionally charged memories, taking a date to a haunted house will leave a much more lasting impression than a less exciting dinner. Maybe not the very first date with some rando off of Tinder though, because that's how you get murdered. Speaking of not dying, in all animals, fear exists as a result of evolution to ensure survival. As such, fear of things like the possibility of ghosts or Trump becoming president that are not a direct threat to our immediate survival can only exist in species or individuals capable of imagination and anticipation. This may explain the correlation that's been found between fearfulness and intelligence. Smarter people have the mental capacity to anticipate a higher number of outcomes for any given situation. So, while the geniuses among us may not be more scared of any one particular situation, we can also rationalize more positive outcomes. We can find more situations to be potentially afraid of as well. Fear conditioning, or making someone afraid of something, otherwise known as being a douche, can be taught by training the amygdala to associate similar stimuli with fear memories. Unintentional fear conditioning is the cause of a lot of the variation in which the same stimuli result in differing fear responses within a given species. In a now famous, and also now super illegal, 1920s experiment, psychologists taught a test subject named Lil Albert, who I was sad to learn was not an OG rapper, but just a baby, to fear white rats and fuzzy bunnies with Pavlovian methods. But fear of things like snakes, spiders, and rats can be found in people who have never even been around them. This is thought to be due to an evolutionary predisposition to avoid poisonous bites and stings and diseases like the rat-carried bubonic plague. Whether due to predisposition or real-life experiences, however, fear conditioning can also work to decrease fear responses when fear-inducing stimuli are repeatedly introduced with no actual danger. Now, I'm not condoning putting massive amounts of non-poisonous spiders in your brother's bed a couple times a month if he's afraid of them, but that's only out of concern for the spiders. And I'm not advising you on what to do when you're hiding in the hallway laughing your face off at his screams. But if you do feel the need to say anything, try something like, "You're welcome." But really, don't thank me. Thanks, science.